And there are a lot of reasons why other kinds of organizations, charities, may want to do that. So content marketing, in some ways, yes, it overlaps with social media marketing, but in other ways, it's different and broader. And okay, fine. There's a lot of elbowing at the table when people are fighting over budgets, but at the end of the day, did we move the needle when it came to what our goals and objectives were?
Welcome to Endless Coffee Cup, a regular discussion of marketing news, culture, and media for our complex digital lifestyle. Join Matt Bailey as he engages in conversation to find insights beyond the latest headlines and deeper understanding for those involved in marketing. Grab a cup of coffee, have a seat, and thanks for joining.
Well, hello, dear listener, and welcome to another edition of the Endless Coffee Cup podcast. Today is something a little different, and I have with me Mr. Greg Jarboe. Greg, welcome back to the show.
Matt, I feel like I've never left.
As much of I hear you in the background when my staff is making audiograms and going over past content, I feel as though you've never left as well.
Well, let's hope that we give the audience something new, and it doesn't sound like the same old, same old.
On that subject, Greg, of something new, we're going to talk about social media. And the hesitation that you and I have both talked about when you talk about social media, it's new right now. It may not be new when it hits the airwaves.
Well, yeah, social media is a funny term. I was actually in the room when the term was coined by Chris Shipley. Now, this is back in 2004. And she was planning to launch a new event called BlogOn 2004. It was held at the Berkeley, the Haas School of Business at Berkeley. And she said, Greg, I'd like you to be a speaker at my first social media conference. And I went, Chris, what's social media? And it was a term that she had made up. And I said, well, that's fine. I don't mind speaking at conferences, but if nobody knows what the term means, then why do you expect anyone's planning to attend? So I was there when she defined the term the first time, and it included blogs and social networks and, wikis and all kinds of things. And I got to be a speaker there.
Yeah.
But I will tell you that when people use the term social media today, there are two definitions that float around, one of which is I'm going to call the Facebook version of the world, where social media includes Facebook and anything that they've acquired like Instagram or WhatsApp, and does not include YouTube. Somehow or other, Facebook cleverly defined social media as, no, they're in a different category. And that made sort of sense until, 2015, when Facebook decided that it was going to become a video-first platform. And they basically begged, borrowed, and stole every idea that Snapchat or YouTube or Vine or TikTok had ever come up with, and tried to cram it into either Facebook and or Instagram wherever they could, and suddenly said, no, we're still social media. They aren't. When it's like, excuse me, they've got video, you've got video, and this makes you different. How? So I one of the things that you absolutely have to start off with in any discussion like this is, okay, what do you include in and what don't you include in? Because I still see lists today.
Right.
There was one that was published just last week on the top 10 social media that you need to be, using, blah, 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 blah. And YouTube wasn't on the list.
What?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's like, excuse me, how can you put TikTok in there and not put YouTube? It's like,
That's funny.
how are you defining your term? What,
Hey, at the beginning of any good discussion, and it's funny because, dear listener, here's the setup. Here's the background, and just take a quick aside. Greg and I are writing another book. We are co-authoring along with other co-authors, and it is the OMCA Guide to Digital Marketing Certification. And you should be aware we've talked about OMCA numerous times on the show, the Online Marketing Certified Associate. And I offer that training on my site. And Greg and I have both been a part of setting the competencies and standards of the OMCA over the years. Part of the book is we've been asked to write a chapter on social media. And as we were going back and forth about how do we do this with something that changes so quickly, and I just tossed it out there like, let's make a recording of you and I talking about it, and let's put the transcript in the book.
And I said that was a brilliant idea, except I had one fundamental disagreement. Your shorthand for what it is that we are about to embark on was Socratic dialogue.
Yes.
Now, Matt, Socratic dialogue assumes that what we're going to be engaged in is like a rational discussion with deep insight and penetrating analysis and all that left brain stuff.
Right. Yep.
Here was the metaphor that came to my mind. I don't know if you remember it. I suspect that we have some of the people who will either listen to this podcast or read the book who are too young to remember. But back in the 1990s, there was a comic strip called Calvin and Hobbes.
Yes. Yes.
And one of the things that they did in that comic strip was play Calvin Ball. Now, Calvin Ball was the least organized sport ever invented, and it could feature all kinds of things like a babysitter flag or a boomerang zone or a corollary zone or invisible sectors, opposite poles, perimeters of wisdom, pernicious poem places, time fracture wickets, very sorry songs, and vortex spots. Now, there was only one permanent rule to Calvin Ball. You couldn't play it the same way twice. That made it a contest of creativity and adaptability rather than one of skill and stamina. Scoring was arbitrary, whimsical, and capricious, like Q to 12 or oogity to boogity. And the lack of fixed rules led to frequent debates between Calvin, the little boy, and Hobbes, his stuffed tiger, who had scored, because what was a score, where the boundaries were, because they always shifted, and when the game was finished. Is it just when you get tired or what? And I want you to know that is the right metaphor.
It is.
For social media marketing, because you know what? It is hard to learn, and then next week you have to learn the new rule.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to adapt, and if you adapt well, you have a chance of winning. And that's hard to do. In fact, the only other player beyond Calvin and Hobbes who ever picked it up quickly was Rosalind, the babysitter. And so, to the extent that we can explain the rules and you understand that all the rules can work the moment that we tell them to you, and then next week somebody will change them.
Yes.
Then you're in the right zone.
I love the metaphor because I can't think of another industry where 99% of your effort is about influencing what a company shows other people, and that company makes all its decisions based on profitability. It doesn't care what you're doing. It cares about pleasing shareholders. And so I love, the rules are going to change because, and we saw something like this just a short while ago when Instagram started favoring video instead of pictures. The rules were changed in the middle of the game. There were winners, there were losers, and there's people standing there wondering what happened. And so it has nothing to do with your skill or ability. there's still these decisions that are made on high for the profitability of a company, and then it filters down into small algorithmic changes.
Oh, yes. And oh, by the way, because the boundaries shift and change, and, 1 week it is not video marketing, that's another category altogether. And the next week, oh yeah, we're video first. One of the things that does is it forces all the other elements of a digital marketing campaign to make sure they're ready to redefine themselves vis-a-vis social media marketing. It's like, whoa. What are you encroaching on now that I used to do? Or what opportunity have you just spotted that I need to go rush and imitate as well? So it is probably one of the most fluid disciplines in digital marketing. It's one of the reasons why, although it's, I think, chapter 6 in the book, it's the last chapter we decided to write because, you know what, if you write this too early, half of it will be outmoded by the time the book gets published.
Right. Well, it's also, I find, so when I'm at conferences, and especially when I'm teaching analytics, one of the biggest questions that consistently comes up, especially in brands and other larger organizations, how do I justify my time and spend on social media? That has got to be one of the top questions that I am asked, because people are trying to rationalize the effort, the time, the media that they develop for social media, and they're trying to show that this time is worth something. But obviously there's a disconnect between the value that I'm producing and a measurable value, and I have to rationalize this time. There's something missing there, and that's a big question.
Yeah, the only historic analog that I'm aware of was the early days of the telephone, where there were a lot of people who said, well, how do you cost justify putting a telephone in my hotel? And they said, well, if you call down for the bellhop to bring you a bucket of ice, you don't have to walk down the stairs. And the bellhop will come up the stairs with the right thing that you wanted the first time. He doesn't have to answer a pull cord. And so there are a lot of people who are still trying to cost justify social media marketing the way the early telephone was, because it's a communications medium. That's fine. Mm-hmm. And some of that communications is person to person. It's me to my friends. It's me to my colleagues. And, oh, by the way, somebody wants to sneak some advertising in there, or somebody wants to influence that conversation so that one of us mentions a brand. It's like, excuse me, why would I want to do that? So, yeah, it's still a crazy place, but at the end of the day, measuring what matters will begin defining what is a waste of time, or what is, personal conversation versus a interaction that could lead to product sales or brand lift, or whatever it is that you're interested in actually accomplishing.
All right. I like that. We may have to move that section down to measurement, because that's a good talk, and we're going to get into that. And what we're doing is we're basically following a script as we go through this, and we're going to be asking each other questions.
There's a script? You have a script? Wait a second.
You gave me the outline.
Oh, I gave you an outline. That's not a script.
Well, okay, let me start here. You started with defining the term, or at least asking the definition, which in a Socratic dialogue is where things start, is by defining our terms. So I love that you started out with your example, your story of where the term was first coined, and the question of how do we define social media marketing. And in your outline, I like how you added today. Today. How are we defining social media marketing?
Yeah, there is a best if used by date stamp on everything that we say or write.
Yes. Well, okay, so I'm going to throw out my definition. And what is interesting, though, is when I was doing my master's degree just a few short years ago, a lot of content that had to do with social media was referred to, hold on, Greg, Web 2.0. And this is what's happening in undergrad and in graduate content is, dear listener, you can't see this, but Greg is wiping his brow and in university level content, they're still using terms such as Web 2.0, which is the, I would say, precursor to what we now call social media. Here's what I would say defines social media is content on a platform that integrates or allows community participation, conversation. So you can post content or information, but if it doesn't allow a public response, either affirming what you've done, it's the addition of tools that allow sharing, communication, recreation, and it also produces things in a threaded view so that you see subsequent comments or shares or likes. You can see this organized view, and so it's not based on the entire site or page, but it's per post. You see the thread that it generates rather than an entire website. And
yep. I agree.
I would start with that.
I agree, and this is what makes it different than, let's say, the early days of the telephone, which was primarily a one-to-one communication channel, one person to one person, or the mass media where it was one to many. What you have with social media is, in many cases, many to one or many to many, or, somebody may kick off a discussion, but it may generate follow-on conversations that go well beyond what the person who initiated that thread may have had in mind. But that is both the potential of this new way of communicating, but it's also what makes it a problematic for misinformation and disinformation, and certainly a threat to reputation management, and all other kinds of the dark side of social media marketing.
Well, and what I find interesting is you using that definition. Social media has been around long before the modern internet. That, like, my first interaction with the internet back in 1984, not as far back as you, Greg, but I got experience. Experience is what I'm... Yeah. An experience. Hey, I was a young kid doing... I was getting into news groups, bulletin boards, because they were very specific niches of information and communities online that were so helpful. It was great to access that information. But anyone who says, I've been on social media since day one, I love to. Oh, really?
Really? Really? Well, yeah. I was actually there in day one. So I was creating content for CompuServe back in 1988. Yeah. I was the director of marketing at PC Computing Magazine, so we were as close to day one as you could get. But let me circle back to, it's been around a long time. It has been, only it's gone by other names. Mm-hmm. So some people called it word of mouth. In fact, when I spoke at the very first social media conference back in 2004, the story that I told at that conference was about Paul Revere's ride, and how everyone thinks that there was this one guy on a fast horse who rode through every Middlesex village and farm spreading the word, right? Well, it turns out there was not one rider that night. There were 40. They were networked. Revere would go into a town like Arlington, tell the captain of the Minuteman unit there what was going down. He would then notify what was called an alarm rider, who would then ride from Arlington over to Medford. And Revere would then ride to Lexington, spread the alarm some more. Another rider would ride off to Bedford. And then he never actually even made it to Concord. He got arrested in Lincoln before he finished the trip. But one of the guys he was riding with that night, Dr. Samuel Prescott, broke away from the British patrol that had grabbed both he and Revere and took the message to Concord, woke up his brother who rode to Sudbury, Dr. Prescott rode to Acton. That's how the word spread.
Mm.
And the British had no preparation for social media because 40 writers got the message off to enough people that night that after blowing away the opposition in Lexington and setting the town of Concord on fire, they suddenly discovered everybody and their cousin who had a musket that day was prepared to make life miserable, and they drove them back into Boston, where they never got out. In fact, they eventually had to leave. So social media, the word spread, back in more than 200 years ago. And all social media that we talk about today does is put that kind of communications on steroids so that, okay, we're not riding horses anymore. And we're not saying the British are coming, although they didn't say the British were coming. That's made up. They were saying the regulars are out. That was actually the message that was being spread that night. But the point is that all we have done is now we use Facebook or Twitter or YouTube or Instagram or, you name it, to send those messages, and people either wake up, get out of bed and go take action, or they roll over and go back to sleep, depending on how boring your message is.
I love it. You just keep going back further and further into history.
I know. I'm so old.
I love it.
My grandkids say I'm older than dirt.
Well, I mean, you were there when they coined the term social media.
So
now
and
I'm wondering how far back we're going.
Here's what's worse. I tried to talk Chris Shipley out of it. I said, Chris, don't use a term that nobody knows what you're talking about. Nobody will come to your conference. And so I failed miserably. She coined the term anyway, and the rest is history. I was wrong. She was right.
That is great. It took off, and it took off quickly. So let's talk about next what areas do we associate with social media marketing? And this is a question I always like asking a business when they ask, what channel should I use? My response to them is, well, what do you want to do? And there are activities that you do that are performed through social media, and that's the first question. What do you want to do? Then let's talk about channel, but let's talk about how you're going to use it first.
Yeah, and I think that's the missing ingredient. Too many people jumped into social media because it was the new thing. Everyone else is doing it. I got to go do it too. Well,
right.
What are you doing? Well, I'm trying to learn how to write in less than 140 characters. It's like, okay, why? And you're absolutely correct. Because it was new, we all focused on the quirky little features that we had to contort ourselves to use to, quote, communicate, as opposed to, okay, communicate for what purpose, what reason? Mm-hmm. So you're right. It does get messy. It's great to define your goals and objectives ahead of time, and maybe social media will fit into them, and maybe they won't.
So how does that fit into content marketing?
Well, content marketing is actually overlaps with social media marketing because there's some of the content that you can create that you might post on Facebook, you might upload to YouTube, you might, put on another social media platform. In other words, you may have a message that you then tailor for the quirky, individualistic nature of a particular platform. That's fine. But guess what? You can also communicate your content posted on your website. This is then where the blog comes back. If you consider blog social media, then putting your content on a blog is part of a social media campaign. But again, the way Facebook has redefined things, there are a lot of people who not only forget YouTube is a social medium, but they also forget that blogs are the original social media even before Facebook came along. In fact, Facebook's biggest challenger once upon a time was MySpace. So Facebook wasn't even the first social network that was out there. They just are the biggest surviving network that is out there. So again, content marketing focuses on, are you going to create valuable and relevant content that can attract a clearly defined audience. And oh, by the way, the purpose of attracting that clearly defined audience is to, make money one way or another. And so again, it's what is my audience interested in that I can get them to visit my blog, visit my website, visit my social media platforms, or heaven forbid, my executives can give a speech in a room to an audience where there isn't a social media channel in sight. And you know what? That's part of a content marketing campaign too. Events, in-person, face-to-face events are a very effective way of content marketing. So again, if you start off with I'm trying to attract an audience, and there are a lot of reasons why businesses will want to, and there are a lot of reasons why other kinds of organizations, charities, may want to do that. So content marketing, in some ways, yes, it overlaps with social media marketing, but in other ways, it's different and broader. And okay, fine. There's a lot of elbowing at the table when people are fighting over budgets, but at the end of the day, did we move the needle when it came to what our goals and objectives were?
Yeah, I kind of see content marketing as almost like a capstone activity, because you need social, you need SEO, you need maybe some paid channels to get that message out for your distribution. That content marketing is kind of that, it requires these disciplines to do it well. So I see that more of a capstone.
Well, again, it gets messy, and at the end of the day, one of the things that I've seen in organization after organization is show me where your brightest leaders are, put them in charge. Don't worry about the name of the department. If your content marketer is the director and your social media manager takes direction, fine. If it's the other way around, if it's the social media director who's telling the content marketing manager the kind of content that will resonate with an audience, fine. That's tell me who is strong or weak in your organization, and structure it accordingly. But yeah, content marketing and social media marketing are frequently confused, and people do need to define where they overlap, where they don't overlap, and who's playing the lead role and who's following.
Yeah. I think that also goes along with the next area that we have as part of the competencies is reputation management. And I see that in so many different areas. I see that in local companies, local businesses that, hey, on Google, I can find your listing, but I can also leave a review. And so maybe not being as active in social media, but monitoring what's said, what reviews are added, what people talk about, that is part of reputation management. But also, with the nature of social media itself, we're allowing community participation. And I forget who it was. It says that if you allow anyone to say anything, someone's going to start complaining. And that's where social media has really, we've allowed people to comment now on anything. Recently, we had an accident here locally, and I went to the local paper online to see, I wanted some details about it. And then I went to the bottom of the article and started reading the comments. And Greg, I have to tell you, I don't know why we decided adding comments to the bottom of a well-researched article from a reporter who was on the spot. Why do we think it's a good idea to let the general public comment on an article?
Oh, I can answer that as a former local newspaper editor.
Yes.
It's because there are 50% fewer local newspaper editors today than there were 15 years ago. So by and large, it works well when there actually is a professional journalist in the room taking notes and writing. But more often than not, particularly in the little town I live in, which is a town of 20,000, the last newspaper gave up the ghost a couple months ago, and we have no journalists turning up to cover town meeting, the Board of Selectmen, any of the official bodies, even the school committee.
Wow.
Which brings me to the big elephant in the room that is filling this vacuum. And it's not so much the public who's asking questions and making comments and leaving reviews and whatever. That's actually just a good, healthy conversation. What is more problematic is what I call disinformation. This is not misinformation, like I'm just not well informed and I can be corrected. This is I am out to sabotage your point of view. You see this more often than not in politics, although frankly, there have been a lot of disinformation campaigns around, let's say, public health or other issues. So COVID-19 has a lot of disinformation campaigns for one reason or another. And one of the things that even Facebook admitted, of course, they were dragged before Congress in order to admit it, was that I think it was in late 2017, they admitted that as many as 126 million of their users in the United States had seen content from Russian disinformation campaigns over the previous 2 years. So from 2015 through to 2017. Twitter, which was also dragged before Congress in the same hearing, also said, yeah. And we found 36,000 Russian bots that were spreading tweets related to the 2016 U.S. election. So one of the problems about, anybody can post a comment. Okay, are they a real person or have they been hired?
Hey everyone, this is Matt, and thanks for listening. Just a quick break in the middle of the podcast here to let you know there's a couple ways that you can connect with us. The first is learn.sitelogic.com. That's the learning site where you can see courses on analytics, courses on digital marketing across paid search, SEO, multiple disciplines. And then also, you can connect with us on Slack. Go to Slack if you're there and look for us at endlesscoffeecup.slack.com. Connect with us. I'd love to hear from you. Hear what ails you in the realm of digital marketing. Are there courses you need, information that you'd like to hear, or maybe some past guests that you'd like to hear more from? Thanks again for being a listener of the Endless Coffee Cup, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Are they a Russian troll? Or, heaven forbid, are they a bot who's just been turned loose? And that is a much more problematic area for social media marketers.
Absolutely. It falls under the astroturfing label as well, that we're going to make something look like it is a groundswell of citizen demands, when in reality it's a bot farm. And it is creating a false sense of something that's important and demanding an explanation to it. So this is something, I hesitate to say, disinformation is social media's Achilles heel. I don't know. I call it the great social experiment that we have done over the past 15 years of combining social media with a mobile device, and let's see what happens. And we're seeing what's happening, and that's our great social experiment.
Yeah, and there were a lot of governments during the, let's say, Arab Spring that saw what happened. And all of a sudden, every dictator around the world discovered, well, okay, we don't want that happening. Let's see how we can set up countermeasures.
Yeah. Well, the next stage of this, and we're kind of going through these, where any one of these could be probably a long discussion in itself, except for monitoring and conversations. I like to call these the businesses that haven't fully quite invested in social media. They're mainly using it to monitor what people say. So they're setting up alerts for their brand. They're using it just to see what are people saying about our brand, our product, our CEO. They're using it more of like a crisis communications, that we want to make sure that everything is good. If someone complains, we're on it. And then kind of that next level then is actually participating in conversations, where I'm not proactively going out and creating content, but I'm going to participate when the conversation rolls around. But kind of the danger of that, and we've talked about this before, is I think it's less than 10% of the content on social media is, or I believe less than 5%, less than 5% on social media actually create content, and probably another 5% actually engage with the content through comments, likes. The vast majority, I think it's 90% or a little less than that, are simply the lurkers. They're just there to read and watch, and they don't engage. So there's a danger to using social media as a primary listening device to get the word of the customer or the think in the customer's brain and find out what they're thinking. What you're actually reading is the vocal minority.
And you can tell pretty quickly that vocal minority is disproportionately male. So again, one of the things as you start digging into social listening, you're listening to a bunch of loudmouth guys who somehow or other feel that they've got to express their opinion. And you're not listening to the more reasonable guys, or in a lot of cases, women who seem savvy enough to say, I'm not going to get dragged into that mud pit. I'll read it, but I'm not going to add my name to the comments.
Yep. So I think that's important to remember is, it's a very vocal minority that are actually creating and commenting. So if you want to get the thinking of your audience, as long as it's not the sole method that you are using to acquire market intelligence, there are many other things that you can add to that.
Yeah, and make sure you also use some audit tools to discover if the people who are making the loudest noise are real people. With actual addresses, which brings me to the next area that often overlaps with social media marketing, and that's influencer marketing. And that's primarily because most of the influencer that anyone tends to target are social media influencers. Now, influencers can be on other platforms. I would consider a journalist an influencer, but most people, that's PR. That's a whole different thing altogether. But when they talk about influencer marketing, they're talking about social media influencers. And there again, you've got to be careful. The influencers learned early on that they got compensated better if they had more followers. So guess what? They found a way to pump up their fake followers. And then people who figured out how to detect fake followers said, "Oh no! Now we're gonna look at engagement. That's our new metric." And then the influencers figured a way to, come in with fake engagement metrics. And so one of the things that you want to think about, particularly if you're going to work with influencers in your social media marketing campaign, is to vet them. You've got to double check that A, they're real, B, and this is much more important, their audience is real. Because if you're going to pay a mega influencer who has a micro influencer audience, you're going to overpay. I mean, it's that simple.
Well, and I love the distinction that's being made in the industry right now between the title influencer and the actual influence that they can create. That there is a distinct distinction, and I almost like to call it a person of influence rather than an influencer, because now, especially, and I was in a crisis communications lecture just yesterday, and they were talking about how part of your crisis communication is when you bring in an expert, and that expert speaks to their level of knowledge. That is an influencer, because they have established authority, they speak to that, and that assists your credibility in the response. So an influencer is not the wannabe fitness guru.
Well, it can be the wannabe fitness guru. I mean, let's put it this way. The Influencer Marketing Hub, which tracks these things, their latest number is at about $16.4 billion will be spent this year on influencer spending big bucks. Over 3/4 of the marketers out there are using influencer marketing. So they think it works. And again, you got to be able to measure what matters to make sure that the influencer is actually influential and that the influencer's audience is actually even remotely interested in your product, your service, your cause,
Right.
Whatever it is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so many more methods of measurement now that I think are assisting that, and to measure the true influence that is wielded by an individual who has a following. The next section is digital advertising, which is interesting because, again, now we're getting elbows at the tables again. We're seeing a lot of crossover. But where I went with this is that just a few years ago, brands, and I remember even at some of the conferences that we were at, everyone is saying you got to get on Facebook, you got to build your audience, you got to put hours into your organic posting. And a few short years later, Facebook changes the algorithm and they reduce the organic, quote unquote, organic reach so that if you are a brand or a business, you are not now reaching the same. If you have an audience, you're maybe reaching 2% of that audience. And if you want to reach more of that audience, you've got to pay. You got to boost your posts. You've got to use their ad network in order to reach the same level of audience that you were reaching before. And this goes to what we were talking about before. The rules changed all of a sudden. And all that work that companies put into developing that organic presence on Facebook pretty much evaporated overnight. And so now I just say, hey, you know what? It's the social networks being completely honest. They are money driven. And so they're going to make decisions that enable them to create more revenue. So every platform adjusts their algorithms to favor certain types of content, reduce corporate content, and force you into an advertising model, which is not bad. They have the audience, and especially like a Facebook, they know all the demographic information. They know what you like. They know what you're looking at. They know what groups you're a part of. So you can actually be a bit more targeted by advertising on these platforms to people that follow certain hashtags, follow certain personalities that express that I like this content. And now you can target them based on that rather than just kind of, I don't know, I call it the hamster wheel of content creation when you're trying to build an audience on a third-party platform. I like the ability of I'm just going to target who I want, focus my ad campaign, and they're giving me the
there's
ability
just
to
one
do
problem with the targeting the people I want concept, which is a good one. Way too many small businesses, medium-sized businesses, even very large brands think they want a demographic audience. I want women who are 18 to 35. Okay. Why? Well, because in the television era, that was the only information I had was gender and age. And I used to be able to pick TV shows to run ads against based on those two factors. So that's how I'm comfortable targeting. Well, particularly as you've just said, when you get to social media, there's a whole extra kind of information on people's behavior. What other sites they visit. And if they've been visiting 14 sites in the last 2 days looking at different cars, guess what? They're interested in buying a car. And oh, by the way, whether you're Facebook or YouTube or any of the other social platforms, they can follow that too. And they can serve up audiences based on their affinities. I'm a motorcycle enthusiast, not a car driver, or based on their in-market behavior. I'm in the market for a car. And so if you are, quote, I only want to reach the people I want to reach, and they are based on a 20th century model of market segmentation, it's like wake up, smell the coffee, which seems to be the right thing to say on an endless coffee cup podcast, and understand that you're not leveraging other information that's available for targeting that you should be using instead.
Absolutely. Regardless of demographic, people have needs. And when we understand the needs, we target the need. And I don't care what their age or gender is. If they need my product, I'm
I've
selling it to them.
I've even seen this in the baby formula category. 40% of the people who are
Yes.
buying baby products, okay, do not have a child in their household. And it's like, okay, who are you weirdos? And the answer is their grandparents or their siblings of
Yeah.
a parent, or they are co-workers of a parent who's buying something on the way home from work. Let's put it this way. There are a lot of people who are in the market for a product category that go beyond the demographic stereotypes. So again, if you are using the old two-dimensional thinking in a three-dimensional world, surprise, surprise, you're going to get hit from below or above or behind or whatever the right direction is.
Well, and on that subject, so you talked about friends, family, coworkers, and there's something I added here that was not it's not in the competencies, but
you
I'm
can
gonna add
do
it
that?
anyway,
You can
Greg.
change things?
I'm gonna add here
Ooh.
dark social. Ooh, doesn't that sound mysterious? Just the majority of content that is shared in what they call dark social. And what dark social is, it's private messaging, chat, email, messaging apps, things that can't be tracked.
And it's not always
by the
dark.
platforms.
Let's put it this way. You're going to give it a bad reputation because for some reason, light, good, dark, bad. But let's put it this way. My kids have kids. So I have grandkids. That's how old I am.
Mm-hmm.
One of whom thinks that I'm as old as the dinosaurs. Okay, fine, got it. But the photos of the grandkids cannot go on Facebook. That's just the edict that came down from the family.
Yes.
Do not post any photos you take of the grandkids on Facebook. Why? Again, there's too much dark stuff going on, and that's not even a dark social, right? So we have a different social medium. It's called Tiny Beans, and it's the private. It's where we can exchange with each other the photos that we wouldn't put in a place where other lurkers might see them.
Right. Yeah, and I think this privacy is going to bring out a much more of this, I would say, small community sharing of pictures, information. I don't necessarily want this published out. I just want to send this to my brother. I was looking at just my messaging just with friends, family, those around, those types of things. It's, if I knew people were watching that, I wouldn't say it necessarily would change anything, but it's just one-on-one. There's no reason to publicize it. And so I think people need to understand that a lot of recommendations, a lot of word of mouth does not happen on the platform. It happens in more personal
Which
types
is
of
why,
communication.
again, social media marketers should all take a course in word of mouth marketing, because it is a nearby neighboring field where there are a lot of good lessons to learn long before social media as we now know it came along. In fact, I once had to cover the 2010 parliamentary elections in the UK, and because it was considered the first social media election. And Nick Clegg, who now works for Facebook, was doing brilliant things on Twitter. And you gotta look at this, and you gotta report on that. And I was writing articles for Search Engine Watch about the campaign, and one of the social media marketers over in the UK who was giving me advice says, "You've missed the biggest social medium that we have here in this country." And boy, did that embarrass me, because, I'm an American, and I'm probably missing some things. What is it? What's the social medium that I failed to report on? He said, pubs. He said, there's more conversation going on in pubs about the election, and you're not covering that aspect of the story at all. And he was right. That's a very social medium.
Absolutely. It's the original social medium. Everyone having a conversation over a drink. I think that's when most people are free to share their opinion. As we said before, most will not share their opinion or comment. They maybe need to get to the pub and have a few drinks, then they'll share.
And when you can argue on behalf of your candidate or party while also playing darts, then you've mastered it. Now
Yes.
that, boy, I want to put you in charge of the campaign.
There we go. So the next thing we deal with is the organizational structure. And I think, very quickly going through this, that how you deal with social media is going to be different based on the size of your team. You alluded to this before. Who's in charge? Does social media fall under content? Does it fall under marketing? Where did those things fall under? So for a small organization, maybe 2 to 5 people, Greg,
it's going to look like one person. I mean, come on. And then you don't have any organizational structure problems at all. What you have is a really typical example of what's actually going on in the real world out there. One person has to do it all, and they have to make trade-offs. I'm working right now with a woman who's running for state representative in Massachusetts. It is a really tiny district. There's 160 different state representatives. So it's, it's parts of 4 towns, but it's small. And her social media team, one guy. And he has so much bandwidth, and then he runs out of day, night, and sleep, And so the trade-offs that one person has to make is what matters most, because that's what I got to do today. And what doesn't matter so much, well, it's not going to happen.
Yep. Once you get into larger teams, here's where I think the Calvin ball comes in really well, because there's not one method that's going to work for everybody. So even if I get into a team where it's funny, the next designation is 6 to 20. I'm like, well, we're playing Calvin ball. You might see a bit more specialization. However, everyone might contribute depending upon what type of organization you are, where everyone is going to contribute something that maybe is then posted under one name or one organization. Or you might have 1 or 2 people, someone doing monitoring, someone content creation. I like to tell people, if you're getting into social media, this is probably the ideal team
It generally
size.
is, yes.
Because, you're going to get some specialization where someone might be in charge of, depending upon how much you're publishing, maybe someone's in charge of each platform, or in charge of digital ads on that platform, or someone is just focused on content creation. So with that specialization, you're going to get some experience in different areas, but also you'll be able to work in different areas and see what's working on there.
And again, for a campaign, organizing your team by platform may make perfect sense. Over the long haul, I would hate to be the person who got assigned to, let's say Vine. I'm the Vine specialist, or I'm the Google Plus specialist, okay? Because when my platform goes bye-bye, so does my job. So cross-training is something that anybody on that team is going to want to seek out real fast, because they never know when tomorrow's change is going to suddenly say, what, organic reach on Facebook, is down to under 2%, time to downsize that team. Well, I don't want to be on that team. Right. I'm also pretty good at Instagram.
Well, and that gets to, I love the next one is organizations with more than 20 marketers.
Oh, now we're talking turf
size.
battles too.
We're talking.
Yes. And what you are also talking about, which will make your organizational matrix even more creative, is you got outside agencies. So it's, what do I hire an outside agency to manage? What do I have on staff to manage? And my best advice in these circumstances is, if it is crucial to your success, you better have someone on staff. If you've got something that's seasonal that you want to dial up and dial back, then, an outside agency is actually pretty handy to have.
Yeah, I find an agency is helpful because typically they've got all the tools in place. They have people who know how to use the tools. And as you said, it can ebb and flow with the business. And it's a great way to get experience very quickly, up to speed and running. The downside is they also have 20 other companies they're doing this for. And so you're on a budget of time, of what they can do for you. So there's the ups and downs of
there's another downside.
The
other downside of the agency, and this actually gets us to the next section in the outline that I thought we had agreed to stick to, even if we do deviate from it, because we're deviant people. We know that. But one of the other metrics that you should keep in mind is if you hire a person in-house, generally you're going to have to give them an annual salary. That's normally, if you can figure out how to get Uber drivers to do work for you, then fair enough. But in the meantime, you probably need to give them an annual salary, which means you take their salary, multiply by 2, and you've got the fully loaded cost of a staff member. Okay? If you hire that same person, but they're at an agency, you got to take their salary, multiply by 2.7. Because in addition to the agency having the overhead that they have to cover, the agency also has a profit margin that it's targeting. And I know this because I've worked it both ways. I was the director of marketing at Lotus when I hired away one of the women at an agency who worked for me. And I was told by the agency, you can't do that. And I said, why not? I like her. I hate you. And I discovered that the agency was charging me 2.7 and my fully loaded cost was 2.0. I could give her a raise and still come in less expensive. But that only works if you've got 12 months a year of work. If you've got 8 months of year of work, then suddenly, the flexibility of the outside agency is a little more useful. So again, the number is 2 versus 2.7. That is the difference between having the person in-house and paying for the same person at an outside agency.
That's a great metric. I love that. Yeah, and you can bring in an outside consultant to maybe help give your strategy structure of, and they can bring in some additional data. Maybe they've got a wealth of information that they can show, but ultimately it's how are we going to set our own Calvin Ball rules, I think is what that, and an outside consultant can show you what other people have done. Here's what I think you should do. It's a way of getting that outside third-party opinion, I think, and also to validate or maybe challenge.
And heaven forbid we hit things like a recession, or another surge in a global pandemic, or a war in Ukraine. Something unexpected comes along and bump in the night happens. You know what? It's easier to dial back your agency than it is to lay off people. I've had to do both. Laying off people is the ugliest part of the. And so again, having a little mix, particularly if you're at this big organization with more than 20 marketers, a mix gives you a lot more elbow room.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's never a fun part of the deal. And then there's social media platforms. And Greg, I think by this, are we talking about like monitoring tools, publishing tools, scheduling tools?
Tools. Let's put it this way. One of the scary things that keeps me up at night is that I can be replaced by a machine learning algorithm. And there are increasingly platforms being developed that use artificial intelligence or machine learning or whatever you want to call the buzzword du jour that say we can identify the influencers that you want to work with, or we can tell you which social media marketing campaigns worked better than, or which element of the search engine marketing campaign put it over the top, so you can adjust your budget next time around. They're coming. They are in development now. Some of them are still not ready for prime time, but I will tell you, keep your eye open, because what you can afford to do will shift. And whether you hire people to do it, or agencies to do it, or you find a platform that can do the mind-numbingly repetitive parts of it that nobody wants to do, but you still need done, it's fluid. So keep your eyes open. Don't make any long-term commitments. But yeah, they're coming.
I think here's my prediction for the future, Greg. In a very short amount of time, I think AI is going to create the bulk of content in social, and then people will be using AI curation tools to sift through the content that other AI has created.
It already is if you consider chatbots.
Yeah.
If I use a chatbot to answer questions, commonly asked questions, boy, is that inexpensive, although you have to develop the chatbot. But once you deploy it, it's really inexpensive. It's a lot less expensive than hiring interns who used to be the cheap labor that you thought you could get away with. But again, they're nibbling at the fringes today. They are in development. They are attacking the biggest problems that have the least amount of creativity. And that's, part of that is actually useful. So I wouldn't dismiss it out of hand.
Yeah. I just think it's going to be most content's going to be created by AI, and it's going to be read by bots.
Well,
and
my bot will call your bot, and then we can do lunch.
Yeah, it'll be automatically put on our calendar. It
God
won't
help
even.
us.
So we're moving through here, and it's funny because as I'm looking at the outline, I'm like, man, I think we've talked about this because we're going in a circular approach. It seems like, because strategy and planning is the next section of describing a social media strategy, and we've brushed up against this many times, and we're going to describe how social media impacts business goals.
It should. Way too often, it doesn't. So again, one of the things that a strategist should do at the beginning of any campaign, let alone any ongoing program, is to say, what are we trying to accomplish? What will move the needle? If I take this to top management and say, look what we did, do they care that we had 47 tweets this week? No, they don't. And so the acid question that I ask some of the people I work with is, okay, so how many social media followers do you need before you sell a car?
That's a good question.
And there's no answer, okay, because there's no correlation. And that's why you want to start with, okay, my objective is to sell a car. Or, pick a different product, a different service. I'm going to launch a new online graduate program that people can take online. Fine. Whatever it is that is your objective. But then work backwards. So is social media going to help you do that or not? And if it does, great. Then what was the return on investment for the money that you put into that social media campaign, or that social media advertising, or that influencer marketing campaign, however you slice it and dice it, here's how much I spent.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.